What's as addictive as alcohol or tobacco targets the young and the underprivileged and makes millions for sports franchises. As we set our gaze beyond the ball at the pitch side, billboards at Euro 2020, ads for beer and home appliances seem a dying breed. Instead, online sports betting rules. It's been more than a decade since most European nations loosened rules on online gambling. What are the consequences? We'll be measuring the impact on the target audience and ask why online sports gambling's benefited handsomely from the pandemic's digital acceleration. When Spurs fans were recently allowed back to their North London stadium, why were they relegated to the upper deck so that TV audiences could instead see a word from Tottenham's sponsor? More broadly, how does this mix of fantasy football and instant betting change the game itself? One of the attractions of sports betting is the promise that you're told that you're smarter than the coach, smarter than your peers. Why not cash in on your second guessing of the so-called experts? Never mind that in any casino, the rule is that the house always wins. Today in the France 24 debate, does football have a gambling problem? And with us is Lionel Laurent, columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Also joining us from Stockport, England, James Grimes, footballer and founder of The Big Step. Tell us what The Big Step is.
Good evening. Yeah, so The Big Step came through my own experiences of gambling addiction. I had a 12-year gambling addiction, and I was a massive football fan. And soon into my recovery from addiction, I realised I couldn't watch football without seeing a bombardment of gambling advertising, like you just mentioned then. So I had the idea of walking to all the football clubs that have gambling sponsors on their shirt in the UK, and we now campaign for an end to all gambling advertising and sponsorship in football to protect young children, but to protect people like me in recovery from gambling addiction.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us. Thanks as well from Glasgow to Robin Ireland, researcher on health and sport at the University of Glasgow. You co-authored the piece Euro 2020, Football's Promotion of Unhealthy Consumption Must End for the Conversation website. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening. Good to hear you.
And from Nice on the French Riviera, attorney Olivier Carcenti, Chief Innovating Advisor at Gamble Alliance. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. A consultancy for regulators in the gaming industry.
Est-ce que là, ça va? Est-ce que là, vous m'entendez?
I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear us? All right, we'll try to reconnect there with Olivier in just a moment. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Sports fans like Lionel and I here in France will have seen this ad countless times before it was recently banned. A young man in a working class suburb beats the odds, wins his sports bet, and then after he's won, he's carried before an adulating hood as the new king of the neighborhood, you might say. Sports betting site Winamax promising big odds, big winnings, big respect. Lionel Laurent, this ad was eventually canceled because it showed underage people too much in a gambling situation.
Right. It took a while for this to be scrapped, so there's a real question here about how quick regulators are to react to this. But we do have regulations and rules to follow on ad campaigns. I think we need a strong regulator to actually enforce the rules. But you know, as you point out, it's not just normalizing sports betting; it's glamorizing it for an audience that really probably might not be able to afford that.
There's a lot to say about that ad in particular. I mean, why is it set in a working class suburb?
Well, because I think they are trying to target people who might have some spare cash that want that kind of escapist feeling, and they want to target the young, and they know exactly how to go about it. We've seen it countless times. We see it everywhere. And I think it's one example of why just having the rules isn't enough. You really want to make sure the regulator can enforce them.
What have you found in your research in terms of what the ads look like outside of France, elsewhere, Robin Ireland?
Very much what was just said. It often focuses on young men, always having them looking at their phone, showing like they're in control of the situation, making them seem kind of very savvy and clever. So if you're clever, you're going to win. And that's the kind of message. And of course, you don't see the failure, do you? So it is very much glamorizing. It's very much using the excitement and the passion of football to bring in new people into gambling.
Bringing new people into gambling. Olivier Carcenti, you heard Lionel Laurent there talking about how there are rules, but they take a long time to be respected. Your thoughts on the fact that it does seem to target the young and the underprivileged?
Well, I think there were rules there. I think they're pretty much applied. I mean, from a jurisdiction to another, obviously they change. But what I hear, the fact that I think it's editorial line that is at stake here rather than rules themselves. So operators or some operators may play, with the lines or the fine lines in the editorials. But in the end, there are strong regulators out there. There are pretty decent rules that operators and regulators should make sure they comply with, and that's what matters really, because legislators do their work in a pretty comprehensive manner. They assess the landscape in order to come up with rules. Probably, some rules work better than others, and some are more consistently applied than others. But again, I think there are rules out there, and in the vast majority of the cases, they're well applied. We're talking here about an isolated case of one ad that has been, pulled out or pulled back or out from the from the audiovisual landscape. But more generally, we need to also focus on more consistent practices that are really applied pretty well by regulators.
All right, so let me ask you then. Advocacy groups have asked British Euro 2020 broadcaster ITV to suspend gambling ads during Wednesday's England-Denmark semi-final. Olivier, is that something you agree with?
I mean, this is a matter of it's more it's an isolated, again, I think it's an isolated decision on a very specific and very high profile event that probably makes it hard to monitor for regulator or even broadcaster in the short run, because it's very concentrated. But would I agree with that? I don't know. I do agree that advertising shall be maintained for operators, because that's the way you fight or combat against illegal gambling. And I think illegal gambling is really the hidden face of the iceberg, is the image face of the iceberg, and that's the part that we don't see, and I think it's even worse. And that's probably what we're focusing on when we're regulating markets, and regulators or legislators in countries are regulating gambling in general. And the reason why they allow advertising or some advertising is because they need to make sure because players always play, no matter what you do. Even if you prohibit gambling, they will still be playing somewhere. So advertising will serve to direct players on legal gambling rather than illegal gambling, and I think that's what that matters here.
Let me bring in James Grimes on that. James, you agree, because it's true that the reason those rules were loosened was because, well, national governments in Europe realized that it's the age of the internet. And as Olivier was just saying, if you don't legalize it and regulate it, people will just go on the internet and bet from somewhere else, right?
And they still do.
I mean, I would say actually that I think that's quite a defeatist attitude. I think in the UK, it's estimated up to 1.4 million people have got a gambling disorder. I don't think that number would be anywhere near as much if we didn't allow complete saturation of advertising across TV, across football. And our laws in this country are woefully outdated. Our Gambling Act was created in 2005, 16 years ago, and it made more mentions of telephone betting, like actually ringing up to call someone to place a bet, than it does online gambling. So it's completely outdated. That's why we need a complete overhaul. And I think we need to take a public health approach. This isn't just about people like me. It isn't just about gambling addicts or people that suffer from gambling harm. This is about young people and creating a narrative and a society where the idea of gambling actually probably should be discouraged when you're a child, because it's a harmful product that is causing harm to a lot of families across Europe, not just in the UK.
Not just in the UK. And how's it going with that campaign of yours to have those ads lifted during Wednesday's semi-final?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult to compete with a £14 billion industry. We're just a small grassroots campaign group formed from people with lived experience of gambling and harm, but we are trying everything we can
Have you heard back
raise
from
awareness
ITV?
of this issue. We haven't yet, but what we know is that there's going to be probably nearly 30 million people watching England v Denmark tomorrow night, and how many out of that are going to be children? Maybe 5 million. So the broadcasters have a choice. Are they going to show gambling adverts in front of the country's children tomorrow? And I hope that they would say no. So we'll wait and see. We'll keep campaigning nonetheless.
In France, gambling on sports, horse racing, poker, it soared last year during the first lockdown, and it hasn't looked back since. In 2020, up 22%, and then just for the first 3 months of this year, up 29%, according to the French National Gaming Authority, while the share price of big sports betting companies have soared as well. As Lionel Laurent, you quoted in your article for Bloomberg, the former boss of Ladbrokes betting company, quite blunt when he testified about the odds of the game last year.
Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it with you. 99% of the customers who play on our sites will lose. So, if you're playing more, you're probably losing more.
So, how do you explain the fact that despite we know the odds are very, very dim that you're going to hit the jackpot, and yet people gamble, and why have they gambled so much more at a time when a lot of sporting events were even cancelled?
Well, generally, gambling, like any vice, is fun, right? And most of us can do it occasionally without becoming addicts. The problem is that, firstly, that the addiction problem has grown. I think there are even studies that suggest it's underestimated. Secondly, with COVID, we were all bored. Those who were locked down probably had excess savings. We didn't know what else to do, and we were looking for entertainment. And even if sports betting suffered, when matches came back, it was the opposite kind of pressure, because sports tournaments, sports clubs had a massive financial problem, as did governments. And suddenly here come these sports betting companies that have managed to lure in even better business. And they say, hey, we're able to advertise. We're flush with cash. So you have this incredible kind of vicious circle where there's huge pressure on sports clubs and tournaments and governments to actually open the doors to this and get more advertising money, more tax money from it. And consumers are playing more with it. So it's a kind of really tough moment, I think, and we need to, as your guests were saying, we need to ask questions about the laws that we have today and the regulations that we have to make sure that it's not promoted in egregiously aggressive ways, because the answer isn't to ban the whole thing, it's to make sure that it's not targeting the wrong people.
Here in France, we're starting to see a bit of pressure on that score. I see that, for instance, there's pushback against the fact that the top flight basketball league in France, men's basketball league, has renamed itself after a sporting. It's put the name of a sports betting company in the name of its league, and that is creating blowback.
Right. I mean, a lot of these countries are in different time periods on their journey for online betting. It's interesting that your guest from the UK. The UK was a real problem child, right? Decades of liberalisation, deregulation, allowing the most egregious kind of constant barrage of ads. So now the UK is going in the right direction. It's saying, why not let's start properly regulating this. Let's maybe even ban sponsorships on football team shirts. Sadly, France is in a phase of going the other way. So I hope that we can actually start learning from the UK.
Going the other way here.
Yeah, absolutely. I see more ads now on French TV for football during the match, before the match, after the match, social media everywhere, than I now see in the UK, where, for PR reasons at least, the betting companies are saying, oh, let's not have ads during the match, a sort of whistle-to-whistle ban. Obviously, it's PR because they still pour ads on social media. But what I'm trying to say is that there are countries going in different directions. Italy and Spain are getting harsher. France is not getting harsher, it's getting softer.
Robin Ireland, did your research find that what Lionel did as to why sports betting and football betting soared so much during the pandemic?
Can I just respond to what was just made, because I think I would be delighted to hear that things were getting better in the UK. They most certainly are not at the moment. Questions are being asked, they're being a debate. But what my research did show, that just one English Premier League game of 90 minutes and plus the half time period had over 700 individual mentions of a gambling brand during that match. It isn't only the shirt sponsorship. Now, while we're watching the Euros, of course, national teams are not sponsored by gambling companies. At least they can't wear it on their shirt. But if you watch the English Premier League, which is a global product, who's watched internationally, you will see messages promoting gambling the whole time. So during the pandemic, as you correctly said, at a Tottenham Hotspur game, the ridiculous situation where a few fans were allowed in, they weren't allowed to obscure the gambling brand. So it seems to be happening even more. I actually looked at games, both the season that's just ended in England and the season before in the English Premier League, and the number of gambling mentions had gone up. So we have certainly not got it right in the UK. I'd like to think we're starting to discuss it because of the work of charities, campaign groups such as James, which had been mentioned, but also the data that is showing us the sheer we're saturated by gambling messages.
Olivier Carsanti, is there something wrong when we're listening to the pregame shows on sports radios and we're subjected to betting odds on all the games all the time? It is a little tedious, isn't it?
I mean, listen, I think there's another layer that we need to explore here. We see, the public advertising, but what you also need to mention here is how operators are tied up with some very stringent regulations and requirements across, all and any jurisdiction to monitor their player or impose some responsible gaming limits. I'm taking the example of France, and Lionel was saying that France was going the other way, the opposite route, because advertising was all over the place. First of all, the French market, I believe, is not as mature as the UK market in terms of sports betting, so that might be one of the reasons. And I don't think it's a regulatory matter. I think it's probably just a moment of the market. That's one. Second is, when you look at France, look at the French regulation, and trust me, they're very, very cumbersome. For any player to register, first of all, they need a full KYC. So there's an age verification that is very, very well. Very, very, very often double checked on public sources and with third party double and age of player. Second, no one to bet without setting a maximum buy-in or wagering limit for a week. Same thing for deposit. Same thing for cashing out. So cards everywhere.
I'm going to interrupt you very briefly, Olivier, because we have to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. It's the semifinals of Euro 2020, and we're seeing a lot of billboard advertisements on the side of pitches for online sports betting. How is it affecting the game? We're talking about it with Lionel Laurent, columnist at Bloomberg Opinion. Thanks for being with us. Thanks as well from Stockport, England, James Grimes, founder of The Big Step, an advocacy group you founded in the wake of your addiction to sports gambling. From Glasgow, Robert Ireland, who is a researcher on health and sport at the University of Glasgow, co-author of Euro 2020, football's promotion of unhealthy consumption must end. That's on the website The Conversation. And from Nice on the French Riviera, attorney Olivier Carcenti, chief innovating advisor at Gamble Alliance, a consultancy for regulators and for the gaming industry. Olivier Carcenti, just before the break, you were saying the French market is not as mature as others. Well, isn't that all the more reason to protect underage people? And by the way, you know, just because you're 18 years of age, you're still vulnerable, aren't you?
Oh, that's right. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, you know, what I'm saying, and the reason, you know, what probably I was just mentioning the fact that there are two faces of a mountain. One depending on how you see it. One is visible, the other one is hidden. The hidden face of the mountain is the fact that operators have as I said, very, very cumbersome and numerous requirements to protect players. They do have, as I said, responsible gaming limits that are required for players to set. Otherwise, they cannot just play. They just cannot wager. So that's one. Second, they have many tools to self-exclude themselves from games. So there are safeguards there. I'm not saying that there's no addiction. I'm saying that operators and regulators are making sure that responsible gaming safeguards are in place. And that's probably the hidden face of the mountain that is the most important than advertising, because advertising doesn't mean anything if player can't play after that. If they see an advertising but cannot register or limited in play or wagering, then I think the harm is maybe limited, and that's exactly what we were talking about when we were talking about
regulation. Let me bring in Robin Ireland on this. You agree, Robin?
I think we unquestionably need regulation. I think the point I'd probably like to make from what's been said so far is that there's a lot of framing this discussion about the responsibility of the individual somehow we're all in a position to make informed choices. And yet when we see the volume of gambling advertising we're getting, I think there has to be a responsibility on the industry and, of course, the regulators to restrict some of this, because it's just so much of it is absolutely saturating. And I think it's very easy to talk about it as if it's a sort of fun activity and there isn't some impact of it. But of course, the vast amount of money that's spent upon gambling and the marketing is designed to increase consumption. That's exactly what it's trying to do. And it's going to hit a large number of people in that. If the framing is all about, well, it's all down to the individual, well, of course, yes, the most vulnerable people will suffer. And people like James and other people have had terrible experiences as a result of this continuous promotion. And to come back to the Euros, of course, this is a very big, exciting event. Everybody gets a little bit carried away. We have been starved of our sport. This is a great moment. On my phone today, just before we started this panel, I was being given odds, unsolicited. I don't follow any gambling companies, but I'm getting odds from William Hill on how much I can spend on the first person to score in the England game tomorrow. And of course, that's exactly what it's about. It's trying to catch particularly young people, and often young men who are seen as having some kind of disposable income. Let's target them. Let's get them when they're excited. That's the way the industry works.
I thought the tournament was over. France was eliminated. But anyway, Euronews spoke to one rehabilitated gambler who placed his first bet at age 17. He tells of the time he lost nearly 3,000 euros in a single weekend.
There came a time when the day after I got paid, I had no money. I had no money to pay the rent, I had no money to eat. I had no money for petrol or to get to work. And there comes a time when you just can't go on anymore.
James Grimes, when you hear stories like that, we talked about where the responsibility lies, where the blame lies. What's your personal thoughts coming out of it on the other side?
I mean, listening to that is hard to hear for me. I completely understand exactly what that guy has gone through. And we talk about things on the other side of the mountain. Well, on the other side of the mountain is in this country alone, there's 650 people, up to 650 people every year that take their own life because of their gambling addiction. So this is not about a few flawed individuals. When we have addictive products sold to you everywhere you look, like Robin just mentioned, anyone is vulnerable to gambling addiction, and the idea of responsibility is interesting for me. I take full responsibility for my recovery. I had to. The gambling industry was never going to do that for me. But throughout 12 years of addiction, not at any point did a gambling company ask me, could I afford to do what I was doing? Was I okay? In fact, instead, what they did was incentivize me by putting me on VIP schemes, by giving me free bets, by giving me free spins on online slot machines. So all of the responsibility on the individual, the responsible gambling narrative, and messages like when the fun stops, stop, are actually contributing towards suicide, because people own all of that shame, all of that guilt. Like that young lad there, they think this is all their own fault, when actually a lot of the fault lies with the organisations that are selling addictive products every single time you watch TV, football, or go on social media.
Olivier Carcenti, when you speak with people from the industry, is there that nagging reminder of what happened with big tobacco, or for years they were able to play it off, saying it wasn't a problem until the lawsuits started coming? All right, we seem to have lost the connection there with Nice.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead, Olivier.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, first of all, personal opinion is they're two very different products. That's one. Remember, and I think that's a figure that we should keep in mind. And I'm thinking like generally speaking across all, let's say, European jurisdictions at least, we have more than 90% players playing recreative gambling. And I don't think such recreative smoke really exists in the end. So in that respect, I think they're really two different products. So that's one. Second is, I'm not saying there might not be isolated cases and very dramatic cases of addiction to gambling. However, as I said earlier, there is a responsibility from operators to make players play responsibly. They might, they have the requirement to make their players play responsibly. So that's what regulators do. They make sure they implement or enact some measures to keep it recreative and safe. And safe gambling is probably the best way to achieve the goals of everyone. Meaning a safe play from players and safe play from a regulatory standpoint that keeps it legal. Because I don't remember who said it, but the fact that we're regulating to make sure illegal doesn't stand was a defeatist approach. I don't think so, because when you look at non-regulated markets or verticals, you have a channelization rate. So meaning the channelization rate is how much can we apprehend, or how much can we grab of the illegal market when we channelize, when we regulate it. We get up to 95% in certain markets, which is great, but including those safeguards, as I mentioned, which are responsible, safe play, and monitoring of play when players are getting above or across a certain line of play. And I think that's crucial to keep the industry balanced. It's not like tobacco. When you sell a pack of cigarettes, you don't say to people, okay, you can smoke 2 today and 2 tomorrow. That's
that's exactly what gambling companies do or have to do in many, many jurisdictions. And if they do it properly and according to the rules, that shall evolve or change and be revised in due course because, some regulation might be outdated and some others are getting up to speed. But once we get there, we should be adapting those regulations.
All right, so James Grimes, do you agree then that you can have a kind of a better regulation where people can have fancy a flutter, but there are limits put on it?
100%. Despite everything that's happened to me, I'm not anti-gambling at all, but I am anti-gambling harm. And we talk of those safeguards that operators should do. Well, I'll be honest, I'm yet to see them. I had 12 years using various gambling operators. I didn't really see any of these in action. And that whilst the gambling industry relies on addiction, and that is the truth, 60% of their profits in this country come from just 5% of their customers. Addiction is integral to their business model. Unfortunately, there's going to be so much resistance to regulation because reducing gambling harm ultimately means reducing profits. And we're talking serious profits to reduce gambling harm. And whilst all the responsibility is on the individual still, and all those wonderful, lovely tools that I can do myself, you're still going to have addiction. There needs to be public health regulation and get on with it. Governments across the world, get on with it. People are dying. 1 in 4 gamblers in this country are experiencing gambling harm, and that's from Oxford University. This is not about a few flawed individuals. Get on with it. Put some regulation in place.
All right, one of the sensations of lockdown was sports gambling, as we've discussed. Now, here's another. The U.S. trading app Robinhood, which offers zero commission trades and which grabbed headlines earlier this year with insurgent campaigns to buy retro stocks like GameStop, before announcing just last week that it would soon go public. Critics call Robinhood a gambling parlor. The gambling problem help site addiction, the Addiction Center, it's called, listing the dangers of Robinhood, which we can tell you about here. Green confetti to celebrate transactions, a colorful, eye-catching interface, emoji phone notifications, one-click trading for instant gratification, free stocks in the shape of lottery tickets. Now, it might seem outside our conversation to be talking about Robinhood, Lionel Laurent, but in fact, I wonder, is it a double addiction that we're all experiencing? One is to gambling and the other is to screens because they know how to keep those eyeballs there in the digital age.
So there's a lot of similarities. The target demographic is the same. It's under 35s, 18 to 35, mostly men. I actually tried to open up a couple of these apps to see how hard it would be to set up a sports betting account versus an online gambling account. Sorry to say, it was very easy, much easier to open a sports betting account than it was even Robinhood. It takes several days. But ultimately, the dopamine hit is the same. The cognitive availability is the same as we're sort of looking at our screens all the time. The target demographic is the same. Obviously, like with tobacco, you can always say, oh, but they're not identical. No, they're not identical. But the way they're promoted and the kind of audience they're trying to reach, there's the similarity. And that's why self-regulation, in my view, has not worked and isn't going to work. And there's plenty of room to put in more rules.
Robin Ireland has the last year and a half thrown on its head your research because, again, it's this. We found ourselves during lockdown in front of screens much more than before, and I found myself personally thinking, "Oh, I should close my computer now," but it wasn't easy sometimes.
No, not at all. And I mean, I think the last point made, we're not trying to necessarily compare to the tobacco industry as a product with gambling. I think what you can compare is actually the work of industry and how it thrives upon that type of marketing. And of course, we've driven mainly tobacco out of sport. Sport didn't fall apart, but the whole language used is incredibly similar because I remember certainly when the debates were happening around tobacco, they were saying, well, exactly that. If you take tobacco industry money out of sport, it won't survive. But also there's a lot of discussion about illegal tobacco. It's the same language. It's sort of pretending somehow that if regulation comes in, well, it'll all go illegal. And of course, the gambling industry itself doesn't want that to happen, does it? It's not in the interest. It's the same with the tobacco industry, but it's the same language. Somehow, well, if we start putting controls in place, it'll all go illegal. I don't really see why that's going to happen. I don't see the evidence of that, and I see what has happened around tobacco regulation. Frankly, should happen with gambling.
Olivier Carsanti, a day trading app like Robinhood, is it the same as playing an online poker game or sports betting?
I mean, there are products that have similarities in terms of a model, or at least in terms of flows for users. But what are we talking about? Is there any gambling? I mean, a sort of gambling addiction to stock market trading? Maybe, I don't know. I don't have the response to that. But I mean, every product I think is very, very different and unique. The sports betting and I heard players are playing and 99% of players lose. I mean, remember there's the underlying fact on which sports betting is based remains sports results. Therefore, there is some odd that needs to be taken into account. I get the points you get to in saying it might create some addiction on certain audiences or public. That is certainly true. However, we're also saying that in a safe environment, it's and when it stays at leisure and recreative practice, I think no matter whether it's Robinhood or sports betting or poker or casino, or lottery. It should be safe, and we should maintain that kind of practices.
James Grimes, let me ask you, because you heard Lionel Laurent talk about the dopamine hit when you're looking at these beautifully ergonomic apps with the screens and things that flash and light up and that have nice colors. And I mean, I look at my fantasy football team during the season. Does it, in your view, does that skew your enjoyment of the game itself?
For me, I can't touch fantasy football. I still think it's got too many connotations with gambling, but that's only for me and my own recovery. And I think any form of product which has an inherent feature that is a gamble or a risk, be that a trading product, sports betting product, fantasy football, will give you something.
Even if there's no money involved.
It's important. For me, I think so. I think we need to be careful now about not saying all gambling is the same, because that would be silly. Of course, there are more harmful products, and there are more products that aren't associated with such harm. But I think a lot of them do use the same appeal strategies. I don't know enough about that trading product, but I don't think anyone knows enough about that trading product. So I think whilst we don't know whether it's causing harm, whether we don't know if it's doing the same thing that online slots and online casinos are doing to people's brains, we should have a precautionary principle. And that would probably involve being restrictful with the advertising of it as well, especially as it's aimed at young people.
And even though France were eliminated, James, are you enjoying Euro 2020?
I am loving it. We haven't conceded a goal. Football's coming home, I have no doubt.
Lionel Laurent?
On what, the French performance? Or?
No. I've forgotten all about that. No. On just, is football an enjoyment of a tournament, enjoyment of the sport, the same as it was before?
It is. But again, I just think my issue is with trying to normalize it as part of a habit. I mean, the campaigns want you to think that to enjoy the game, you now have to do something at the same time. And that's something at the same time, drinking beer, but it's now also putting a bet. And it is not just one bet. It's a multitude of possible bets, multitude of possible odds. And all the ads show good-looking men and women together in a social atmosphere, placing bets like it's eating chips. And the reality is very different.
Robin Ireland, can you just enjoy the game?
Yeah, well, I had exactly that, having been researching it for so long and watching all the ads. I do my best not to notice them, and that's the whole point. They're so in your face, but I love football. I will continue to watch it, and I really would like football to get rid of this sort of almost like a curse for me around it. I don't think it needs the money that it takes from gambling. I think there are other ways to do it, and let's go back to enjoy our sport.
All right. We shall be, in any case, paying attention to the rest of the tournament. I want to thank you so much, Robin Ireland, for joining us from Glasgow, Olivier Carcenti in Nice in southern France, James Grimes in Stockport in the north of England, and Lionel Laurent. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.